Good morning and welcome back to Tactics Board. Norwich City face Bristol City in the Championship this weekend, and although it's a game that Norwich fans might not be especially excited for after Tuesday's trip to Watford and how that panned out, it's a game David Wagner will certainly be focused on as the pressure is right back on him. After two consecutive wins, of course, that defeat against the Hornets was very deflating indeed, especially for the more than 1,300 travelling fans who witnessed their team go 2-0 up pretty quickly and then go on to lose the game 3-2. So I'm going to take a look at the team I think Wagner will select for the game and how tactically he'll try to set up to avoid another embarrassing defeat like that Watford game. So without further ado, this is the 11 I think he'll pick to travel to Ashton Gate. I've gone for Angus Gunn in goal, Jack Stacey at right back, Shane Duffy and Danny Bart at centre back, Dimitris Giannoulis at left back with Gabriel Sara and Kenny McLean in the centre of midfield, Christian Fastnacht on the right, Onel Hernandez on the left and Ashley Barnes slightly behind Adam Eder up front. And to go from the back, I think George Long's performance at Watford underlined probably why Angus Gunn is likely to come straight back in for this one. From what Wagner was saying going into the Watford game, it sounds like Angus Gunn has been in training since they returned from Vicarage Road, and after a long performance that I think a lot of people were criticising, and probably rightly so, there's probably things that he could have done about all three goals. Of course, got a hand to the first one. I was looking at the post-shot XG for that, which sort of measures how much a goalkeeper should be saving it, and it was sort of between 0.4 and 0.5. So what that means is that between 50 and 60% of those shots would be saved. Long gets a hand to it and it still goes into the bottom corner. Then the second goal comes across the face of goal. It's a pretty simple header and Long is absolutely nowhere to be seen. When it drops in your own 6-yard box, I personally feel in those scenarios that a keeper should always be there and try and be a commanding presence, but he just sort of fell into his own net as Watford drew level. And then on the third goal, it was a trademark failure to deal with a long shot, a looping sort of half volley that probably he could have held. He pushed it straight out to Yassir Spria, who goes round him and scores the winner. So for all three goals, I felt Long was at fault to ranging degrees, and I don't think he's impressed too many Norwich fans, to be honest. Overall, got his first clean sheet at the club in that 1-0 win over QPR, and I think he's kind of an average second choice goalkeeper in the Championship, but he certainly isn't going to be starting week in, week out when Angus Gunn is fit, and given we're expecting that to be the case, I expect the Scottish international to be in between the sticks against Bristol. At right back, I've gone for Jack Stacey. I know he was substituted for Kellen Fisher, but I think that was probably more to do with the fact that he was booked in the first half and Wagner wanted to avoid any issues on that front. He hasn't been especially poor compared to some of his teammates. Admittedly, you do want to see standards step up, but I thought he was fairly decent in the QPR game. Obviously played a pivotal role in turning things around against Cardiff, and given how little Wagner likes to change that back four and his penchant for experience, I'd be very surprised if Stacey comes out of the team. It's the same situation really with the centre-backs, neither of which had an especially good game against Watford, aside from Danny Bart, of course, scoring the opener from Gabriel Sara's corner in the 3rd minute. I think there's probably things they could have done both in and out of possession. Out of possession, 3 fairly sloppy goals. I mean, the first one you could argue not much they could do about it, but they failed to clear before obviously Ishmael Kone gets that shot away, and then the ball into the box for the second. Danny Bart's nowhere to be seen, and the third, again, it breaks to Asprilla and he's not really got much challenge from any defenders. You probably have to bring Giannoulis into that discussion as well, and of course we'll come on to him, but I don't think the defence was especially good. Probably at a lot of other teams, especially considering Duffy's form in recent weeks and months, you would see changes in that department. But we know how important a stable team is to Wagner and how important experience is to him. So with a 33-year-old and a 31-year-old at the heart of defence, I don't see any problems from his point of view. And I expect to see those selected. I know that probably won't be a popular decision amongst Norwich fans, and maybe I'll be proven wrong, but just based on what we know of Wagner's team selections so far, that seems like the most likely outcome. The same with Giannoulis, who I thought defensively didn't have a great game against Watford, but probably had the beating of his marker down the Watford right in Andrews, and I felt he probably could have done with a little bit of support from his teammates in the last couple of games. Managed to get forward quite a lot against QPR as well, and then had to turn around and wait for the likes of Ono Hernandez to catch up with him and actually have an impact on the game. It was similar with Stacey in that QPR game. So in possession, I'd like to see them given a little bit of help. Defensively, I think they have to probably take a bit of responsibility and try and improve those performances. But Giannoulis is still by far City's best left back for me, and I expect to see him starting against Watford after what's been probably a mixed season for him so far. But to be fair, in contrast to the rest of the team, more good than bad. So I expect to see him at left back. In centre midfield, although tactically it isn't working week in, week out, Wagner seems to want to persist with this McLean and Sarah axis. Both sort of more number 8s than number 6s, but McLean is now seen as this almost defensive midfielder in this system. Sarah did more than his fair share of defensive work actually against Watford and also against QPR, where his defensive statistics were really good. Obviously 2 assists in that Watford game as well, and I feel a little bit for him because he probably deserves to be in a much, much better team, probably not even a team in the Championship, and here he is playing in the lower mid-table with Norwich. But for now, you'd expect to see him game in, game out. Same with Kenny McLean, and I do think they could do with some help in that midfield, but number 1, I'm not sure Norwich have that player. Number 2, Wagner wants to play with those two in midfield, and he seems to be a fairly stubborn man when it comes to team selection and tactics, so I don't expect to see that change. Same on the wings, really. When I was sort of lining up this team, I thought surely one of them has to get dropped. And then I thought, what alternatives are there? Probably Borja Sainz is the first name you're looking at, and unless Jonathan Rowe is back from injury, and of course he wasn't even on the bench in Hertfordshire. Sainz just doesn't seem to be a player that Wagner fancies too much. He didn't really come out in especially strong support, even when Paddy asked him about Sainz's performance after the game at Watford, and it just feels to me like in Wagner's own head he probably doesn't have any alternatives, although the Norwich fans I'm very sure would like to see that change. It's an area of the pitch that I don't see him tinkering with somehow. I thought Ono Hernandez put in maybe his worst performance in a Norwich shirt at Watford, barely found a teammate at any point, didn't have any real impact on the game whatsoever, not even in terms of the usual excitement that he provides. There wasn't any of that to go along with the lack of end product that he's often criticised for. Christian Fastnacht as well, the sort of player that I expect to see Wagner keep in because of his adherence to the tactics, his usefulness in the setup. Maybe defensively he's better than your average winger in the Championship, but on the ball just contributes very little over the last few weeks. I think he's absolutely lost confidence. But, as I said, Wagner doesn't like to make changes to the players that he trusts most and that sort of fit into his system. And Fastnacht is one of those at the moment. Just doesn't seem to want to include Sainz. So until he actually starts, probably my first tactics board where I predict him to start will be after he's actually made his first start. Because until Wagner throws him into the team, I just struggle to believe that he actually trusts him to turn out a Championship performance, to be honest. I've gone with Adam Ida and Ashley Barnes because I don't think there's any real alternative. When you look at the injury that Hwang went off with against Watford, it was a hamstring injury, and just based on history, obviously we haven't spoken to David Wagner ahead of the Bristol game yet, but when you look at the history of those injuries and how long they normally take, it's not normally an especially serious one, but it's certainly not one where you come back in sort of 3 or 4 days. So given he came off with that muscular complaint, it seems unlikely that he would be fit to start or to even be in the matchday squad, to be honest, against Bristol. And with Josh Sargent out injured as well, it looks like Wagner doesn't have much of an alternative. I have to say I haven't been especially impressed with Barnes since he returned to the team, and I don't think I'm alone in that. There's been a lot of talk of the experience or intangibles that he provides, what he adds in the dressing room, but I just think in and out of possession, technically and physically, what has he really offered on the pitch? He hasn't been that involved. He hasn't won the ball back especially effectively. He hasn't been part of a particularly aggressive press. He hasn't been very good at holding the ball up too often. He's struggled to find teammates. He's struggled to get into the game, and he spent most of that Watford game actually parked on the edge of his own box, and I think probably you can put a lot of that down to Wagner's tactics. And obviously he's deployed a system in which his team drops deeper and deeper in the last couple of weeks, and especially after going up 2-0, that was the only way they were really going to play. So I feel for Barnes in that sense a little bit, but I think he has to add more actually footballing wise rather than just these intangibles and these almost cliches that people speak about. That's what I think has maybe got Norwich where they are to an extent. In the summer they just went experience, 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 and that's what Wagner wanted. That's what he got. And I think you've seen the consequences, to be honest, of being so focused on that one area at times this summer. And Barnes, to be honest, has been a symptom of that. I think with Sargent back in the team, we maybe have to judge it again, because they did look like such a forceful duo alongside each other earlier on in the season. But by himself, without the help of Sargent and just alongside Ida or Hwang, it doesn't really look like he can contribute much. I still expect to see him to start, as I said, as I've spoken about with Bart and Duffy and Fastnacht. He's one of those players that Wagner just likes. I think Hernandez fits into that bracket as well. So although his performances haven't been great, there aren't many alternatives. He's a player that Wagner likes, and I expect to see him in the team. I think it's going to be another opportunity for Adam Ida, because again, that lack of choice. I think he's struggled to get into games recently as well. Didn't really get into it at Watford. There was one chance in the first half when it was 2-2, pretty late on in the half. He cut in twice and then saw his deflected shot saved. But other than that, it didn't make much of an impact. So I don't think he's immune from criticism either. But he has had, doesn't really feel like it, but he has had his best goal-scoring season of his career so far. So maybe we should give him... So maybe we should give him a little bit more credit. But yeah, I expect to see him start against Bristol anyway. Just to talk quickly about how the home team will play. Of course, they've got Liam Manning in there now, who has become known for his sort of passing style. That was how he achieved success at Oxford United. A Norwich fan, Manning, of course. And he is having trouble sort of adjusting Bristol style of play. He's obviously come in after Nigel Pearson, and he's now trying to play this possession-based football. It's a similar sort of transition that the new Millwall boss, Joe Edwards, is trying to oversee from Gary Rowett in South London. And you can see why there's a bit of a conflict there. But unfortunately for Norwich, and I think probably fans are realistic to this fact, teams will be looking at them now and going, Norwich is an opportunity to end a poor run of form. I think if it was the other way around, the same would be true. So that's the position where Norwich are now. It's definitely not the position they should ever be in the Championship, and it's going to be an interesting battle. For what it's worth, I think Wagner will set up the same. He'll probably look at the QPR game and say, okay, against a possession-based team, we managed to hold off and score the one goal with the game's one moment of quality. And I think he might try and do the same thing against Bristol, albeit it's against better players. It's away from home, and I think the confidence won't quite be there that it was after that Cardiff win, and after the international break gave a little bit of respite to his players. So there are a few elements going against them compared to what there were against QPR, but given Wagner's mindset at the moment, the way that the team is setting up, I expect to see a similar sort of setup in the southwest. But hopefully Norwich can produce something fairly decent for those fans that will be travelling very, very far indeed. And we'll see you there. Of course, we'll have every kick covered, so get across to Pinkham.com. We've got an offer now on that literally started today, £3 for 3 months. I'm always telling you about the exceptional value of a subscription, and that's obviously now gone up. So give that a try, let me know what you think. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you again on Tactics Board very soon.